Your Free to Go is sponsored by Milburn Men's Clothing, where top athletes shop for sharp, tailored style. And whether Mark and I are in the studio or the courtroom, Milburn dresses us for success. Mention YFTG and get 10% off at Milburn Men's Clothing, which has been providing the finest in men's clothing and suits since 1946. Call 651 645 2922 or visit www.milburn.com. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Your Free to Go. Hopefully, it's your favorite podcast because I know Mark and I certainly love doing this podcast and bringing it to the world. Welcome back. So today, Mark, I'm going to start off by sharing a really cool experience with you and with our audience. A couple weeks ago, I was at a fundraiser. It was at the Sunrise, the Hard Rock Casino, the Seminole Hard Rock Casino in South Florida, which is a huge, really impressive Las Vegas-like casino. I went for a fundraiser. I went for this group called Home Safe. Home Safe is a very large campus with multiple locations where children who are in foster care can live and live safely and get therapeutic services. And it's a really, really wonderful organization. And they do family therapy too. If there's a family with trauma and drug issues or different other issues, they provide a really great path for young people who are alone in this world to thrive and get educated and move into a productive future. So I was there for their fundraiser, and the first hour, Mark, was in a separate room where it was a cocktail party and a big auction. There were 150 items that you could auction, put money, to win a foursome for golf, a dinner somewhere, a basket of towels, beach towels. It was really fun. So it lasted about an hour. And at the end of this hour, Mark, they opened up these massive doors to the ballroom where the event was going to take place. A really nice dinner. There was a band. There were some announcements and so forth. And as I'm walking in, by the way, there's 500 people there. It's huge. The entire board from this Home Safe is standing there at the doors welcoming everybody in. 500 people come slowly walking into the ballroom. And this whole board, there were 10 of them. As I'm walking in, they turn to me and say, "You're free to go in." And I look at them. I'm like, "What?" And they all start laughing and said, "You're free to go in." And I said, "No, come on." They said, "You're Guy Fronstin, right? We saw you signed up for this. We're so excited when we saw your name on here. We all listen to your podcast. The entire staff at Home Safe loves your podcast, and we're so excited to meet you." And so the whole night, it was like the talk of the event. And I just knew I had to tell you about it. I think our viewers, because this thing is growing, it's really growing, and I'm so excited. I know you are too. So, by the way, I do need to do a pitch for this, Home Safe, a great organization. The CEO, Matt Ladika, is awesome. Please, you guys, if you want to go to their website, check them out, homesafe.org. And maybe one of you will, or more of you will really, this will resonate with you when you look at their website, and maybe you'll support them because, as I said, it's a great cause for children who are living in foster care. So, Mark, I had to share that with you before we got started today.
That's great.
Right? And
That's
welcome.
great.
I know you're in Florida, but you are remote because you had a meeting south of.
I had a meeting in Fort Lauderdale, and I needed a place to do this podcast from. So I have a friend who works at a exotic car dealership, 101 Motorsports, which, by the way, I bought a car from a couple of years ago, and they do a great job, and they have fantastic cars. If you're looking for cars that'll go fast, which make no sense anymore since you can't go fast anywhere, and especially in LA, where I'm sitting in my McLaren driving 7 miles an hour, doesn't make any sense. So,
Well,
but in any event, they gave me the space, and I know today we're going to do a few things different. I thought we were going to talk a little bit about crazy courtroom events and vignettes
mhm.
that we've had, but I know you've got some interesting stuff to tell us. Why don't you go first?
Yeah, well, I do want to back up because our viewers don't realize that you are a car aficionado. So for you to give this endorsement is a big deal. I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but you have 6 cars. They're all super high performance cars. You know your cars. So, if I ever
Yeah, but
need
they
one,
have no engines and no tires,
yeah, yeah, they're all from 1950.
right? No,
So
I
yeah,
like to collect cars and fix them up. But in any event,
yeah.
yeah. So let's tell our viewers some interesting stuff.
Right. So we often do crazy ass cases. We've had a few guests on now that are pretty interesting. We get a lot of positive feedback from our listeners. Today, we're going to do crazy ass shorts. So instead of spending, an entire hour talking about one or two cases, we're going to spend the hour talking about a bunch of small cases, maybe a funny courtroom scene or something like that. And I'll go ahead and start because I want to start with one that I just got a verdict on this week. It's an interesting case. A guy was driving in Atlanta in a the city of Atlanta, basically, and he was charged with the criminal charge of reckless driving. So that's why he hired me. Very, very serious accident. A tanker, an oil tanker, pulled out of a gas station, and my client was alleged to have been driving recklessly fast, cutting through lanes, and cut in front of the tanker, caused a huge explosion, 4 fatalities, very, very, very serious case, several other injuries, including very serious burns. It was really a very, very serious, as you can imagine, case. We were able to prove that he wasn't driving reckless, which is a criminal traffic offense. And so the prosecutor, after about 6-7 months, reduced it to an infraction. An infraction like speeding or failing to maintain a lane, but the infraction he was charged with was improper lane change. And we were able to do that by, showing that the black box in his car proved that he wasn't speeding and weaving in and out of lanes. So that was
Now, black box. What are you talking about? Black box in the
yeah.
car. I
I'm
think a
glad.
lot of people don't know about that.
I'm glad you asked because it's important that we stop every once in a while and educate our viewers on these things. So people probably know from airplane crashes that they're always looking for a black box to that the investigators can look at the data from right before the crash or even hours before the crash until the second it crashed. It talks about speed, it talks about velocity, it talks about wind, it talks about the engines and everything. So they can help through that data in the black box. It's literally a box, and it's typically usually black. That is a computer and tracks all the data. And from that black box, investigators can figure out why a plane crashed, most of the time. So about 10 years or so ago, cars started having black boxes in them. And when there's an accident, law enforcement will often get the black box and download the information. So we were
Are
able
these from all cars?
So as it started in the automobile industry, because as you can imagine, it's an expensive technology, they were really in the high-end cars. I think the first car I ever saw it in was a Bentley. That was in the John Goodman DUI vehicular homicide case that I handled, had a black box about 12, 13 years ago. That was the first time I had seen it. And then, Mercedes and high-end. But now, I'd say probably 80% of cars on the road have a black box. So we were able to download that data and show. Now, meanwhile, my client told me from day one, he said, I did not cut anyone off. I did not fail to maintain a lane. I did not improperly lane change. He said, I was cut off. I was cut off. I was cut off. And so he maintained that position forever from the first moment he called me right after he was, at this incident. And so we worked really hard on this case because he was taking that really strong and assertive and position. And he had a perfectly clean record. He's a gentleman in his 50s, never done anything wrong in his life, family man, hardworking, productive member of society, and so forth. But it was a very serious case, so the charges were serious. And as everyone can imagine, whenever there's an accident like this, civil lawyers get involved. And Mark, I love to explain very simply, civil lawyers deal with money, criminal lawyers deal with people's freedom, right? That's the biggest distinction. So civil lawyers start representing all the victims in the case, the ones that had passed away as well as the ones that survived, and they start suing, lawsuits coming left and right at my client. Now, I stayed on the criminal side of this case. I didn't go on the civil side. He had auto insurance, and the best thing about auto insurance is that it'll pay for a lawyer if you're being sued for a car accident. So fortunately, his civil attorney, his civil law insurance automobile insurance hired a really good civil attorney out of New Jersey, and he did a great job building this case up. And I got to give him all the credit because at the end of the day, he was able to determine and figure out through very, very good investigative work that a third party had caused the accident and then fled the scene, right? And so, but as you know, civil cases, people should realize, take years and years and years to resolve. Maybe 5 to 10 years is not unusual. Criminal cases usually get over in 1 to 3 years. Some are a little longer, some are even less than the year. In this case, occurred 4 years ago. So my client has been stressing out for 4 years, being pursued for these charges. And I kept going to the traffic court judge saying, Judge, we need to reset this case because they're addressing all these cases in civil court in this really intense litigation, very serious case, a lot of injuries, and we need to wait for that case to resolve before we can proceed. And the judge agreed. I'd go 3 weeks later, or sorry, 3 months later, another continuance. 3 months later, another continuance. So now we're running on 4 years. A couple of weeks ago, the judge says, you know what, no more continuances. I'm sorry the civil case isn't over yet, but, we got to get this infraction hearing over. So earlier this week, I went into court and to try the case, actually go to trial on a traffic infraction for improper lane change. The day before going to court, I learned through a source that the driver of the tanker who had passed away, the insurance for that company had paid many, many, many millions of dollars out to victims in this case. So they actually had settled because apparently the tanker didn't pull out appropriately or he violated some other traffic rules when he pulled out of the gas station. I also learned that the person who actually, we believe, caused the accident and fled had been tracked down again because the civil lawyer for my client did such a great job. I cannot take credit for that. He and his team did a great job. He had also settled with the clients, with the victims' insurance and their lawyers for a lot of money as well. So that was really interesting to me. So I go to court the next day and I say, Judge, I just learned about this. I need to take some time to find out what kind of settlements there were. Maybe these settlements exonerated my client because our position is he's not guilty. Additionally, I had a legal nuance was that the civil attorneys didn't want to tell me all the details of their investigation, which would have been very, very helpful and needed by me for my trial. But they didn't want to tell me just in case they had to go to trial in the civil court. They didn't want to show their hand in advance. They wanted it to be a secret if any of their cases had to go to trial. But they were determined to go to trial because their client, my client, is the same as their client, was not guilty. So they weren't in a position at that point to really pay any settlements out, which I understood. So I told the judge in infraction court, I'm handcuffed, Your Honor. I can't get that information until after that civil case is concluded, and it's being represented to me by attorneys of the law that this information will exonerate our client. So the judge understood, but he said, Guy, there's like 8 witnesses here. We need to go forward. Actually, there were 7 witnesses. We need to go forward already. So I said, okay, Judge, give me a moment. So I talked to the witnesses, and then I go back to the judge, and I say, Judge, I'd like to proffer, and Marc, it's always a good opportunity to you reminded me earlier, to educate our clients, our listeners. What does proffer mean? It means before you actually go on the record, we say to the judge, Judge, we're ready to go forward, but let me just tell you what I think is going to come out today. And I said, I have good news for Your Honor. So I said, look, there's 3 deputies here that were at the accident scene and did all the investigation. I just spoke to them. They're going to represent that they saw absolutely nothing because they arrived after the accident. Okay. I said, there's 4 other people here. I said, 3 of them I just spoke to, and they've described a car that doesn't match my client's car at all. And the 4th person here, he's going to plead the 5th. And the judge says, well, why is he pleading the 5th? I said, well, he's concerned that he may be charged criminally with leaving the scene of an accident. And therefore, he has the constitutional right not to incriminate himself. And that's the 5th Amendment. So the judge said, well, Mr. Fronstin, thank you for your proffer. If I'm hearing you correctly, you've got 3 officers who saw nothing. You've got 3 witnesses who are describing a different car causing this accident. And you have 1 person who might point the finger at your client, but it's most likely to get himself out of trouble because he is concerned he's going to be charged with leaving the scene of an accident. I said, yes, that's correct. He said, well, Mr. Fronstin, I think we should go forward with this trial today because based on that representation, and I see everyone in the courtroom and no one is disagreeing with what you just represented in the court, there's no case here against your client, and I'm going to dismiss the charges right here and right now.
Wow.
And he says, your client is free to go. So,
Wow.
yeah. So, my client lived with this for 4 years, and even though he always knew I didn't cause this accident, he was charged with it, and people died. It really, really was powerful and painful and, put a lot of pressure on him, and he was depressed for years over it. And now he was, exonerated. So,
Well, that's a good result,
right.
an excellent result, but,
Yeah.
it does point out that sometimes justice takes a long time to occur. And, people don't realize that, while you're under indictment or being charged with a crime, and a case goes on for a long time, there's a very intense psychological effect on the individual.
There sure
And,
is. Yeah.
just especially if you're in jail, it's horrible.
And by the way,
But
it's also a great endorsement for why you have to have auto insurance. Georgia
right,
requires auto insurance. Not every state requires it, but I want to share you this. The his insurance, our client's automobile insurance, was looking at paying out $100+ million in settlements if they had gone that route. Instead, they probably paid $3 million to a civil lawyer, and that it was worth every penny because that civil lawyer has now saved that insurance company from paying out this money, and also our clients being exonerated. But if he didn't have insurance, that client would have had to pay, somehow paid to hire that civil lawyer to defend him. So thank God he had insurance, and thank God his insurance, automobile insurance, hired the right lawyer who put a lot of work into this. So I give him all the credit. Of course, I'm not.
I'm
Yeah.
amazed that there are states that there's no requirement for insurance.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
insane.
yep, some
I
don't have
mean,
it. It's kind of like motorcycle riders. If you you don't have to have insurance if you're wearing a helmet. But if you're not
hmm,
wearing a helmet, you have to have insurance. It's crazy.
is that here in Florida?
Yeah, that was in Florida. Yeah, that's but it's not something you and I do regularly, so I haven't looked at that in maybe 2 years. But as of a couple of years ago, that was the law. It's kind of
That's
silly.
crazy.
Yeah.
Well, that's a
So
great story and a
thank you.
great result.
Yes.
And I think, as we promised our listeners, we were going to talk a little bit about crazy things that occur in the courtroom.
Well, you
And
got one
most
for us?
people, yeah, I've got several, but just as a preamble, a lot of times courtroom trials are very boring, and it's sort of like I equate it to baseball in that you could sit there and nothing's really much happening for a while, and then all of a sudden, crack of a bat, and everything changes like lightning in a bottle.
All right.
And it happens the same way in the courtroom. That's why when people say to me, "Oh, I want to come down and watch you on trial," I say, "Let me let you know when there's going to be a good witness or interesting passage that's going to occur during a particular time in the trial. Otherwise, you'll sit there and you'll go crazy." And we do too as lawyers in the long trials. You can go crazy, and it's in during long trials sometimes that the craziest things happen, especially when you're there for, a period of months, which I've had several 4-month trials. Everybody gets very comfortable. And of course, you're not supposed to eat in the courtroom.
Right.
But, a lot of times you get very hungry and you get a little lax. So I had one case where we were hiding behind the computer screens, eating M&Ms and eating candy and all sorts of things and drinking from soda bottles. And it got to the point that, I think the judge kind of noticed it and gave a shake of his head, like, "Don't be doing that because, you don't want the jury to see." And we're hiding from the jury.
Yeah,
And then
it's always awkward
yeah,
because they do give lawyers a little more leeway, like to look at their phone and maybe have a little snack, like a power
right,
bar or something. And I
right,
always feel a little bit uncomfortable because anyone in the courtroom and jurors, certainly in the courtroom, are told, "Do not be on your phone, do not drink, bring a drink in here," and often jurors are in that same, get that same instruction. But lawyers get a little more discretion because we're there usually during a trial day from 8 a.m. to 6:30, 7 p.m. So they give us a little more leeway, and I do feel bad when I do sneak a little snack or drink out of my bottle of water when no one else is allowed to do that. So sorry to
right.
interrupt you. But
No, 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 that's
yeah.
exactly what happened. So what happened is, after about a week of us doing this, and kind of felt it was becoming obvious to the jury, and the judge, I guess, was starting to get ticked off about it. So what did he do? He turned to the jury one day and he outed us. He said, "Well, since the defense lawyers seem to have a habit of eating while this trial is going on, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you the opportunity to eat during the trial." Well, it was fine for a while. People were bringing in, like you say, power bars or little snacks or things like that. So one day, one of the jurors brought in this big, I don't know if it was a Big Mac or a Burger King. What do they call it? A Burger King? What's
Whopper,
the
the
big
Whopper.
the Whopper? Yeah,
Yeah.
it looked like a double Whopper. It was enormous, and he starts eating, and the juices of it are starting to flow out, and they flow out onto the woman next to him,
Oh, no.
and now she's turning to him, and they start an argument. And it got to the point that everybody's hearing this argument, and the judge had to stop the trial. And then, after a while, he got everybody to a point where he said, "Look, folks, I know I told you could eat in the courtroom, but you can't eat in the courtroom anymore. This is getting out of hand."
Right.
He
Yeah.
turned to us defense lawyers and the prosecution. He said, "And that goes for you too."
Oh,
And so the trial went on for about another month. And finally, one of the lawyers, and this lawyer was just an amazing guy. Well, I'm going to tell you a couple of stories about him. He finally decided, you know what? I don't care what the judge is saying. I'm hungry. Oh, what does he do? Just in an act of total defiance, he brings in a sandwich
oh,
and he starts eating the sandwich behind the computer screen so the jury can't see him.
yeah.
But where the judge was positioned, the
Mhm.
judge could see him.
Right. And
And the judge,
government attorneys often feel they can get away with a little more than anyone else as well.
yeah.
They always do.
So the judge stops the trial, calls everybody up to the sidebar for a conference that the jury can't hear. Sometimes they put on this white noise or music or something so the jury can't hear what you're saying, and they tell you to talk low. And he says, "The next time anybody eats in this courtroom, they will be held in contempt."
Oh,
All
boy.
right. So about 10 minutes later, I see the judge popping lozenges or mints into his mouth. And I say to the other lawyers, "Well, that's kind of interesting. So at least we know we can do that, right?"
Right, right.
So one of the same lawyer who brought in the sandwich, during lunchtime, he buys, one of those, packets of those little mints.
Yes, sir.
I forget what they call them. Uh, and he starts popping them. The judge calls him up during the break, says, "I thought I told you you can't eat in the courtroom." He said, "Judge, I'm just doing what you're doing."
Oh,
The
boy.
judge says, "Oh, yeah? Guess what? That wasn't a lozenge. That wasn't a candy. That wasn't a mint. That was my medication."
Oh, oh, no. Ugh,
He held the lawyer in contempt,
um,
charged him $100
book that
um, to his favorite charity.
well, normally I'd say that was a rookie prosecutor, but I know your cases are big cases, especially as, over a month long. So I'm sure it was a seasoned prosecutor. You'd think they would know better. That's a rookie mistake, as they
Yeah,
say.
that was a rookie
Yeah,
mistake by an
yeah,
AUSA.
yeah, yeah.
But anyway, talking about crazy stuff that happens in the courtroom, I mean, that's an interesting event. But I'd say one of the craziest things I ever witnessed was I had a client that had been in jail for a long time before the trial. And when I met him, I'd say he was probably close to 400 pounds.
Wow.
He was very, very heavy. He was obese. And naturally, by being in jail and the restrictions on the food there, and I guess he was just trying to get healthy, he lost, I would say, somewhere in the vicinity of 150 pounds or more, maybe
Well,
close to 200 pounds.
yeah. By the way, I've seen the exact opposite happen, Mark. The food is not healthy. It's
Well, it's all starch diet. Yeah.
yeah, it's all sorts out. I've seen people blow up and gain tons of weight in jail, but it sounds like, your client probably said this food is horrible, which it is typically, and just stopped eating. But most importantly, lost a lot of weight, which is great for
He
his
lost a
health.
lot of weight. He
Yeah.
looked great. But the problem was the day of the verdict. And normally, what happened is his family would bring in the street clothes because when you're a defendant in a case in front of a jury, you're not supposed to be wearing your prison clothes because the jury is actually not supposed to know that you're in jail
Right. Yeah.
because of the inferences that if you're being jailed, maybe you're more guilty. So the
Yeah.
courts are very, very careful
That's very
to make sure
prejudicial
that
yeah,
right.
prejudicial to the defense. Not right. Yeah.
So the jury is always seeing your client dressed in street clothes, usually a suit. And for every day of that trial, the family was bringing in, every couple of days, different clothing. They would give it to the marshals, and then the marshals would make sure he was dressed in it when he's brought into court, and when he's sitting there, he's not in chains or handcuffs or anything.
Right.
So as far as the jury's concerned, he's he's on bond. But of course,
Right.
the reality is in a long trial, it's interesting because the jury never sees him outside in the hallway, never sees him talking to
Right.
us.
And
They
they
kind of catch on.
Yeah, and they also see there's 6 deputies in the courtroom not far from him,
Right,
with
right,
who are armed,
right, right. But in any event, so what happens is the day of the verdict, for some reason, the family decided to bring in a particularly nice suit to have him wear. But they didn't realize they didn't bring in the suits that they had cut down or new suits that
Oh,
they had
no.
bought to accommodate his weight loss.
Right.
And he did not know this either. And they brought in a suit that was fitting him when he was close to 400 pounds.
Oh,
Now he's 200 and something
right.
pounds.
Yeah.
And he puts this thing on, and the jacket looks like he's wearing a tent.
Sure. Yeah.
And the pants, he's got a belt tied. The belt they brought in was the wrong belt too.
Oy.
He's got a belt that he's actually tying around and rolling it into itself because there were no belt
Right.
loops or hoops for the thing to catch on because the belt was probably a size 50 or whatever it was.
Right.
Anyway, so he was very uncomfortable. And then when the jury comes back with the verdict, and the judge is going to announce it. The foreman hands it to the bailiff. The bailiff brings it to the judge, and we're all nervous. It's certainly the most nervous time of a trial.
Always.
It's agonizing. I don't care. At hundreds of trials, it's still the same. Very agonizing. And the judge says, "Mr. So and So, please stand up." And I stand up, and we're standing up as we're waiting for the verdict. And what happens? All of a sudden, I hear a ton of laughing behind me. And I look over, my client's pants fell
Oh
down to
my
the floor,
god. No,
and he's
no.
standing there in his underwear.
Ugh.
The jury is looking at him, and they start to laugh. Everybody in the courtroom is laughing, and he is trying real hard to pull up these pants, and he winds up stepping on one of the pants
Oh,
legs, and he
no.
falls over. So
Oh.
now he's laying on the floor in his underwear. He still doesn't have the pants pulled up, and it's like pandemonium. And people in the audience, now the jury's being respectful.
Right.
The audience is laughing,
Cracking up.
is absolutely cracking up. And I don't know who these people were, half of them. Maybe they were waiting for the next case. It was some
Right.
family members.
Uh,
They were shocked, and they realized their mistake. So finally, he gets up. I help him up. He puts on his pants. He ties it around, and the judge says, "Mr. So and So, you can sit down."
yeah,
He
that's good.
sits down. The jury verdict was not guilty.
Oh, thank God. That's great.
And I have to tell you, that was a case that was an interesting case. It was a false statement case.
Mm,
Should have never been tried. There's a defense in a false statement or a perjury case called that you said the literal truth.
uh-huh.
It may have come across falsely, but literally, if you analyze the words or what you said, it was literally true. And the jury found him not guilty. They weren't out very long for a lengthy trial, and that was the end of it. But I'll tell you, uh,
Yeah.
it was probably one of the craziest events I've ever
Right.
seen in a courtroom.
By the way, if he had been found guilty and I were the judge, I would have said, "The embarrassment you just went through is your punishment. You're free to go." That was enough for a lifetime of embarrassment. But I do think we need to cut to one of our commercials real quick. We've got these guys that advertise on our show and pay for our show. So let's break away right now if our show is ready to do that. Thanks. You're Free to Go is sponsored by Lang Realty, South Florida's premier residential real estate broker. Whether you're buying, selling, or renting a home or condo, Lang's experienced realtors are standing by ready to help you. Contact one of Lang's top realtors today at 561 703 2427. Welcome back to You're Free to Go, your favorite podcast.
I just wanted to point out because you got me confused earlier. It was not the prosecutor in that earlier vignette that I talked about that was eating the sandwich. It was one of my co-counsel.
Oh, oh, no, no.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
why the judge really,
yeah,
went
yeah,
heavy
'cause
on him, I'm
yeah.
sure.
Yeah, they
The
usually
prosecutor was a very young guy. Yeah.
yeah, they usually I find judges kinda favor prosecutors, but, well, whatever, we won't go down that road.
Yeah, we won't go down that
Yeah.
road. Well,
So
a lot of them,
yeah,
listen,
yeah,
let's face facts. A lot of judges come from either state attorney's
right.
offices or the DA's offices
Yep,
or from the US attorney's offices in the federal system. That
exactly.
doesn't mean they can't be fair, but
Right.
they have a lot of relationships and sensitivities and sensibilities that come from having been a prosecutor.
Yep, and yeah, I get it. So I have another one I want to share. It's mine is going to be a case. It's a crazy short case, crazy ass short case, and it just shows how we don't only defend. We have to strategize in these cases. So this is a case my client wasn't ever. They weren't charged with a crime when they called me. So I get a call from a woman who is in her 40s, and she works for a major airline, a major commercial airline. I'm not going to mention the name of it. But she works for me, and she was a supervisor. She worked like in the call center as a supervisor. It was a huge room with 400 people in it, all in little, cubby holes with, like, I have the headset on, and they're all taking calls. And basically, my client, whenever clients were being, passengers were calling to get a refund, whether they were canceling a flight or had to rebook a flight, whatever it was, and there was some financial transaction where money was being paid back to the client, to the passenger of the airline. Um, my client, the supervisor, would process a lot of those. And what she started doing, she called me. She said, "Guy, I've done something really, really bad." I said, "What's that?" She says, "When I process these credit card refunds, I tell the person that they're going to get a refund of $140, for example, but they're actually due a refund of $180. I take the extra 40, I give them the 140, I take the 40 extra and I put it onto my own credit card. I've set up a system where it looks like we're refunding the full 180 to the passenger, but on two different cards of their own." And I've been doing this for a couple years now, and it's added up to quite a bit of money. And I don't know what to do. I'm really, really upset about it. I'm scared. I've never been in trouble before, and I don't know what to do. I said, "Well, how much money do you think it adds up to?" She goes, "I know exactly what. It's added up to $180,000. So it's a lot of
Hmm.
money, really, really a lot of money. So my next question to her was, "Tell me, why are you taking this money?" I mean, you and I have done this so long, Mark. We've seen it for gambling addictions. We've seen it for drug and alcohol addictions. We've seen it because maybe someone has a girlfriend, they're married, and they have someone on the side that they're taking care of. So there's all sorts of reasons that people take money like this when when they're accused and then they're guilty of something if they tell us they've done it. So I said, "Why have you done this?" She said, "Well, I have a daughter. She has severe medical, she was born severely with medical issues, very, very severe, requires surgeries, requires all sorts of medical assistance and aids and so forth to help her. And I can't afford it on my salary." She goes, "I'm paid very well, but these bills are just, unbelievable, and I cannot even come close to affording them." I said, "So are you telling me that every dollar that you've taken on these credit cards has gone to taking care of your daughter's medical issues?" She said, "Absolutely, 100%. I said, "Have you ever bought a car with it?" She said, "No." "Have you ever bought a pocketbook?" "No." "Have you bought a jet ski or a boat?" "Absolutely not." "Have you put in a stock savings account?" "No." So I went through, what we do with our clients and vetted everything and confirmed that every single penny went toward her daughter's medical care. Well, I sit back, my heart is, is like, very sensitive to this. I'm like, well, yes, it's a crime what she's done, grand theft. But on the other hand, we all as parents kind of, I feel her pain. I understand why she did what she did. So I thought to myself, well, I said, "Have the police called you?" She goes, "No." She goes, "The airline has no idea I've been doing this, and I could go on forever and they'll never know." So I said, "Okay." But she said, "But I got to come clean. I don't know what to do. I'm really scared." She said, "Should I quit the job and just leave? It'll just be behind me." I said, "I have a better idea." And this is where we're always not always defending someone in court, but we're strategizing how to help our clients. I said, "How about this? How about I call legal counsel for the airline and I make a presentation to them and a proposal. And this is what I told the airline legal counsel because my client agreed. Good idea. Let's do it. I said to the legal counsel, I said, I have an employee who's committed some credit card fraud. I'm not going to disclose her name at this time, but it's approximately 180,000. It's a lot of money, and I want to propose something to you. I want to propose that she submit a resignation effective immediately, and I want to propose. Remember, Mark and our listeners, she works in a huge room with like 400 people, all with headsets, talking on the phone, calling, taking calls all day long, and phone operating, room, whatever you want to call it. And I said, I want to stage a fake arrest. We're going to get private investigators dressed or off duty cops dressed in security uniforms with badges to come in and pull her away from her desk in front of everybody and arrest her and let everyone know, and through your own means, why she's being arrested. And then we will agree to pay back. The most she can do is $300 a month, which will take about 50 years, but that's the most she can pay back. And we will sign a confidentiality agreement to not disclose how she did it and so forth. The lawyer said, I kind of like this idea. I don't think we should tell the employees what she did. I think we should just take her out of the room, and people will know if you do any. The message we're sending is if you do anything wrong that's criminal, you're going to get arrested, you're going to be fired, and your future here is done. And so he liked the idea. He floated it, ran it up the flagpole to his superiors, and they liked it as well. And the condition of this was that they do not tell the police. And I showed them all the medical bills, and they too, like my heart was soft, and for this woman and what she was going through, they too, were very receptive to it and recognized, yes, it's against the law, yes, it's wrong, but she's willing to accept responsibility. So what was interesting is we entered this agreement. She was going to pay $300 a month for 50 years, and we did it. They did the fake arrest. She paid every payment for 9 months in a row on time, $300 a month. And then very sadly and tragically, her daughter passed away. I think at the time she was about 11 years old when she finally passed. And
That's horrible. Yeah.
in month 10, my client made another payment. And I get a letter in the mail with the payment returned to me and a letter saying from this very large commercial airline, we heard about that her daughter passed. We're very sympathetic. It is horrible, like you just said, Mark. They understood that. And they said, we're returning her $300 and we're waiving the balance of her payments. We wish her well in life. And, it's someone who, yes, she did the wrong thing at first, but for the right reason. But the corporate world saw that and forgave her and has allowed her to move on. And
That's an amazing story and
right,
a great result, Guy. And
happy
I
ending.
applaud you for that very
Yeah,
creative approach. Taking creative approaches, sometimes thinking out of the box, is the solution to a problem. And I applaud you for that. It does raise a couple of interesting points. One is that there is this sort of a principle of what we call voluntary disclosure. It's not a per se legal defense. I know that in certain areas, for example, with respect to the IRS, sometimes you can avoid prosecution by making voluntary disclosure. There from time to time there have been formal voluntary disclosure programs that the IRS has had. But just generally speaking, if you come forward and admit to something that is not known to either law enforcement or even the victim, it does give you a great advantage in working something out that's both equitable and favorable to your client, and that's what you did.
yeah,
The other thing that I wanted to mention that flows from what you said is that a lot of people think that if a crime is committed, but you can convince the victim not to prosecute, that automatically gets you off the hook. We've heard the expression in popular culture called, I'm not going to press charges or I'm going to press charges. Well, the reality is the ultimate decision is up to the prosecutor. And in very serious crimes, even if you work out a civil settlement sometimes with the victim, that doesn't automatically get you off the hook. Now, of course, the victim refuses to come cooperate with the police or with the government or testify. Of course, they can be compelled to do that. But more often than not, you have to understand that just working it out with the victim is the first step. You still got to get the prosecutor or the police department to agree not to pursue it. So automatically, just hearing somebody say, "Well, I'm not going to press
Right.
charges," when I get that response in a case that hasn't gotten to the
Mhm.
point yet of an arrest, I might, say, "Look, okay, that's great, but we got to have a little bit more assurance than that.
Yeah.
We got to figure it out. We may have to go forward
Right.
to the authorities and say, with you saying, we're satisfied. They made restitution. We don't think there's anything to be gained."
I just gave a lecture to a group of lawyers. I think there were about 200, 300 attorneys in the room on this exact topic, Mark, because um, defendants have tremendous constitutional rights to due process and to defend their case and so forth. But over the years, there's been every state has adopted these victims' bill of rights, these victims' rights. Some, like in Florida, it's called Marcy's Law. And so the judges are trying to figure out, and this is what I was lecturing on, is how do you balance the rights of a victim with the rights of the defendant who has constitutional rights? So, for example, these rights for victims, Victims' Bill of Rights and Marcy's Law say the victim has the right to be protected from the victim. So they could, I mean, the defendant, so they could put the defendant on an ankle monitor or house arrest. Well, that defendant's still presumed innocent. They're until proven guilty. They are allowed to be have input into the process. Doesn't mean they make the decisions. That's what you just pointed out. But how could they have so much input in the process? How do you balance that with the defendant's rights? So it's a real. We could do a whole 3-part episode just on victims' rights and their
I think
influence.
we should. We should
Yeah.
probably have somebody who is, one of the representatives on the victim rights side come in and talk to us, because the sad reality is that you do have some cases where victims wield too much influence
Correct.
because of their emotional state of being,
Yeah.
as a result of what's happened to them. And understandably,
Right.
prosecutors may look at it differently, or courts or judges may look at
Right.
it differently. And then conversely, you have so many cases that you hear about where the victims are totally ignored,
That's true.
where,
Yeah.
especially in some of these sexual crime cases now, as of late, especially with the Epstein case, and then the case involving the coach who abused the gymnast. I
Right.
forget his name, who went away forever.
Right.
I think 3 lifetimes and 4 reincarnations, and
Yeah.
deservedly
Is that
so.
right?
But, in those cases, we have seen that victims are starting to wield more
Right.
power. So it is,
Right.
as you say, a
Yeah.
very interesting
We'll do
balance
that.
that has to be struck.
Yeah, we'll do that one time because I have a lot of strong feelings on that and experiences that I can share, as you can as well. And we'll get someone to be a guest who has expertise in that area. I need to share a quick, short, crazy ass short, and no pun. You'll find out in a minute. No pun on the word shorts, but it ties in. I hadn't thought about it, but it ties into what you said earlier about your client at the trial who lost all that weight and his pants fell down, and it reminded me of this case. I had a guy who was at his kids. First of all, we've all heard about crazy parents at kids, sports games, basketball, softball, football, baseball, soccer, and all that. Well, this is one of those stories. Very quickly, I got to share with you. This father was at his kids. I think they were 12-year-old or 14-year-old girls' soccer game. This father, and there were like 100 parents there. All the kids, all their parents. This father was yelling at the coach, yelling at the referee nonstop. It was a real problem for everybody. And so then at one point, this father, who became my client, runs onto the field, yelling at the ref. The ref throws him out, says you have to leave the park, where the kids are playing the soccer game. And as he's running off the field, in front of all the parents, in front of all the 12 or 14-year-old girls, I forget, he pulls down his pants to moon the referee as he's leaving. And when he does that, he kind of loses balance and his pants fall down to his ankles and his entire junk is falling out because he had to pull his pants down with his underwear to show the referee his butt. His whole ass was hanging out, and then the whole front side was facing all the parents in the stands, and all his junk came falling out. So so he got picked up, for exposure and arrested and charged with that. So when you told that story about your client, it came to my mind. I'll never forget that one. And nor will any of the people in the community. They'll never forget that either.
What else? What ultimately happened in that?
Oh, he did some. He wrote like a letter of apology. He did some community service. He didn't wind up with a criminal record or anything. So it was fine. It didn't ruin his future, but he wrote apology letters to the coaches, to the referee. It was just a very constructive. And I think, if I remember correctly, also it's been a number of years, probably 10 years. I think he wasn't able to come to a game the rest of the season, which is appropriate. Yeah. So another crazy one. Um, I have another quick one too, by the way, for another crazy ass short case. Is an 82-year-old man called me once, and he says, "Look, I've never been in trouble in my life. I'm 82. Um, no prior record. My wife passed away 18 months ago. She was the love of my life." Said I was ready to start dating again. I was a member of a book club when after my wife passed away. I was looking for activities, so I joined a book club, and I met this really nice young lady at a book club. Not young was This guy was very sensitive and thoughtful and kind. He was old school, so he referred to her as young. I think she was maybe 79 years old, and. He said, I asked her out on a date. He said, so we went on our first date, and you got to remember, he said, Guy, I haven't been on a date in 60 years. So that's how long I'd been with my wife. She's gone 18 months now. I was very lonely, and I went on this date, and boy, he's so cute, this guy. He's like, I dressed so nice. I wore a really, I got my stuff from the dry cleaner, beautiful suit. I took her out to a lovely restaurant in a nice area with good energy. He said, I even brought flowers. He said, I had cologne on. He's like, and he said, I was so nervous though. I hadn't been on a date in 60 years. He said, but I was so nervous that I drank a little too much at dinner. He said, I wasn't a sloppy drunk or anything at all. He says, I'm a total gentleman. I walked her to her car at the end. And then he said, and then I walked over to valet to where my car was parked. And the valet pulls up my car. I hop in it. I start driving away. He said, about a quarter of a mile later, cops pull me over. He said, sir, I'm not speeding. I didn't fail to maintain a lane. I didn't run a stop sign or anything. Why are you pulling me over? He said, well, you just stole a car from the valet parker. So unfortunately, this 82-year-old man, he was so nervous. He had some drinks. He got in the wrong car at the valet stand, took the wrong car, and he gets pulled over for grand theft auto. Now, unfortunately, they, of course, didn't charge him with grand theft auto. He had his ticket for his car and so forth. But he did get a DUI. And so he said to me, the only client I've ever had, and I've had thousands of DUI cases in my career, the only client that ever said, Guy, I'm accepting responsibility. I don't want you to do any work on this case. I want to go in front of the judge and I want to admit guilt. I did something wrong. I drank too much. I shouldn't have gone behind the wheel of any car, whether it was stolen or not. He said, I'm a gentleman. I'm honorable. I'm going to do the right thing. So I said, okay, if that's really what you want to do, I said, we have a very good judge for this case. Let's talk to him and see how he wants to handle it. So I went in front of the judge. I told him the exact story I just told you and all our listeners. I got into a little more detail about what a kind, thoughtful, and sensitive gentleman this 82-year-old was, and how it was a special, important night for him and how nervous he was. And at the end of the case, the judge says, I said he's going to plead guilty, Your Honor, to DUI. And the judge turns to the gentleman, let's call him, Mr. Jones. He says, Mr. Jones, I appreciate the situation you were in, and I'm not going to accept your case right now. I will not accept your plea of guilty. You've lived a 82-year life of being a solid member of society. You don't deserve to have a criminal record. And I'm turning to the prosecutor right now. And the judge looks at the prosecutor in the eye and says, do you really want to prosecute this gentleman? And, there's a thing where you have to know your judge. We get taught that, Mark, in first day of law school. Prosecutor knew when they heard that and they saw the judge, they knew the judge. They knew that even if a jury found this guy guilty, this judge wasn't going to punish him. So the prosecutor stood up from their table, looked at me, looked at the judge, looked at my client, and they said to my client and to the judge, Your Honor, the state will null pros, which means dismiss all charges of DUI in this case. And so my 82-year-old man wound up walking away with no criminal record and no DUI. And I did check in with him a couple of months later. He had gone out with that woman a couple more times. I should probably follow up with him. It's been about 2 years, I think, since that case, see if they wound up continuing to date. But it was a very interesting and cute experience with a very happy ending. Obviously, no one was hurt. And so it was a happy
That's
client.
amazing.
Yeah,
That's a great result. Well,
yeah,
to finish up,
yeah.
because we got just have a few minutes, that reminds me of what happened to me last night.
What happened?
After you and I drove up to Fort Pierce for a
Yeah,
case and came back. It took us forever because of the traffic. I thought I
horrible.
was in LA. And when I finally got back to my brother's house where I stay, He had already eaten. So I went out to Chipotle and picked up something.
Okay.
And as I'm borrowed his car yesterday, as you know. And as I get back into the parking lot to go into the car, I'm not paying too much attention. And I get into the car, it looks like the same car. I don't even think. And I open the door opens, I
Oh,
get into the car, and the alarm starts blaring.
whoa.
And I look around and I notice it ain't my brother's car. I see clothes on the seat, I see the drinks in the cup holder, and I realize it's the same make and maybe even the same model. It's a Genesis, but it's not my car. It's
Wow.
not his car.
Uh,
And I freak out and the alarm's blaring. And so I lift off the seat, I get outside, and as I stand up, there are two sheriff's deputies. They
no.
had just pulled in next to the car, obviously to get some food at Chipotle.
Oh,
And they look at me and I look at them and I say, I know how to tell you guys this. I thought this was my brother's car. I got into the wrong car. And then naturally, as you remember, I'm in a suit and tie
right.
and
You have your
uh, you know,
briefcase. Yeah.
and a briefcase. So
Yeah.
I said, I'm sorry, guys. I had a long day.
Huh.
I apologize. And some guy comes running out and he says, "What's happening? What's happening?" And the sheriff said, "No, this guy made a mistake. He got into the wrong car."
Uh, well, so
So
that was another happy ending, and
it
they
can
told you,
happen.
they said you're free to
Yeah,
go, I hope. Yeah.
you're free to go.
Yeah. Okay.
So we've
Yeah.
got some good stuff in our
Yeah.
next episode.
We do.
So
We do.
until then,
You-
ladies and gentlemen,
You're
you're
free
free to
to
go.
go. Down Low Investigations is a sponsor of You're Free to Go. Behind every great criminal defense attorney is a great private investigator. That's why Mark and I use Down Low to investigate cases all over the country. Down Low can help you too, whether you're running a background check on an employee or running a background check on a blind date, or let's say you need someone followed or some other type of investigative work conducted. Down Low is the way to go. Call Download Investigations at 561 843 1806. Everything expressed and discussed in this episode are the opinions and experiences of attorneys Guy Fronstin and Marc Nurik and their guests. All ethical rules are complied with. Attorney-client privilege and confidential information is not shared or released during these episodes, and names, dates, locations, and other identifying information may be changed to protect confidentiality. Topics are embellished, and none of the statements made constitute legal advice and should not be considered or relied on as such.